The old man is finally gone, having lived so long for nothing. Now he can collect his life insurance, right? I can finally be compensated for the misfortune of marrying you. Show me how much you're getting. I have no interest in joining your pathetic hick funeral. The words my husband spoke were not condolences, but outright insults directed at my father and me. To make matters worse, he tossed coins from his pocket at me, calling it his contribution to the gift of assistance. The once kind man who had given me that lucky dime and encouragement is nowhere to be seen. How did it all come to this? My vision was blurred by tears of rage and misery. Suddenly, a man appeared before me, playing a crucial role in what would come next. I was 35, working at a confectionery plant. My ex-husband and I had met at a previous job. At that time, I was a fresh graduate, clueless about my work. I made countless mistakes while everyone else seemed to get it right. I thought they were just minor flaws at first, but my struggle to learn new tasks persisted. The company fostered a cutthroat environment, so I was completely lost. When I made mistakes, my colleagues were burdened, and I carried the weight of their frustration. One day, it became too overwhelming, and I ended up crying in a small kitchen corner at work. My ex-husband, who happened to find me there, asked, "What's wrong? Do you want to talk?" I thanked him through my tears and confessed that I had made another mistake. He was 2 years older and had been with the company longer. He listened to my woes and managed to make me smile. I thought to myself, what a nice guy, and felt a bit better in his presence. He then remembered something and pulled out his wallet. Taking out a coin, he said, "This is a lucky silver dime from 1944. I hope it brings you good luck." I vowed to always keep that dime with me, no matter what. I soon found myself falling for him and asked a colleague to help me get closer to him. We started dating, fell in love, and eventually got married. I was ecstatic about the life we were building together. But there was one person who didn't agree with me, my father. He had devoted his life to the family farm, and although he was a man of few words and had rarely spoken to me growing up, he had a clear objection to my marriage. "I think you're rushing into this," he said. "I don't trust him. He might seem like a nice guy, but I believe there's someone else hiding behind that facade. You should wait and get to know him better." I retorted, "How do you know he's not good for me after meeting him just once? Besides, you've never given me any fatherly advice before. Now, all of a sudden, you're acting like a concerned father and lecturing me. I'm an adult. I don't need your permission." Hearing his objections for the first time, I felt hurt and unfairly blamed him. He never mentioned it again, and I ignored his warning, got married, and left home. We hadn't spoken since then. I told myself everything was fine. I had my husband and was happy with my marriage. I pretended there was nothing wrong in my life, but the reality was far from what I had imagined. Shortly after we married, my ex began to act arrogantly toward me. "Hey, where's my dinner?" he would demand. "Didn't I tell you to clean the house? I'm embarrassed living in this mess. I want to wear this tomorrow, so iron it and don't forget to polish my shoes." Despite his mistreatment, I tried my best to balance work and home life. I perfected housework to avoid criticism, but he took it for granted and never showed appreciation. "Good job, huh?" he would say sarcastically. "Of course, you should be able to do all of this as a wife. Are you seriously asking for a compliment? If you think this is praiseworthy, you should be on your knees thanking me for my job." And now, with his promotion to manager, he used his position to demean me even more. "All your work proposals are lame and boring. It's clear you were born and raised in the backcountry. Your existence reeks of mud," he sneered. He didn't just degrade me, he also disrespected my family. I was growing increasingly fed up with him. He even mocked my hobby of sketching new dessert ideas, which I was passionate about. I spent a lot of time on it, but he dismissed my sketches as terrible designs and said I was wasting my time. His disdain escalated to criticizing my family and the products they sent us. "Send me T-bone instead," he sneered. "It's a shame your family is too poor to send anything of value." His venomous remarks were revolting. It was infuriating that he couldn't appreciate the kindness of others. I should have confronted him, but I disliked confrontation and couldn't stand up for myself. I was also terrified of being left without a place to go if he kicked me out. The fear of being lost kept me from arguing with him. He knew he had control over me, so his behavior worsened. One day, I cooked a white stew using milk from my family. As I anticipated, he viciously criticized it, saying, "Ew, it smells rancid and reeks of poverty." I can't eat poor people's food. I was prepared for his harsh comments and planned to shrug them off. But this time, he crossed a line. Before this stew stinks up the whole house with the odor of poverty, I'm throwing it out. I feel like I'm in jail being served such food. Seriously, you're the worst wife. He dumped the pot of stew into the trash. I finally lost my temper. How could you throw away the food I took time to make? You're disgusting for wasting perfectly good food like that. Instead of apologizing, he snapped back, blah blah blah. You're so dull, useless, and annoying. Who do you think you're talking to? I'm better than you. You're just a burden. I don't need you anymore. Then he revealed why he married me. I thought at 35, you'd have savings. You seemed out of the dating loop for so long. I just wanted your money and to use you like a robot. You wanted me anyway, so it was a win-win, right? His cruel revelation hit me hard. He had only married me to exploit my finances. We delayed the marriage to make you save more money. It was all part of my plan. My savings are almost gone because you've been splurging, but you never mentioned that your savings are almost gone. How's that my fault? It's your job to manage the finances, so you take responsibility. A penniless wife is worthless to me, lower than my farm animals. With a vile sneer, he suddenly grabbed my sketches from the shelf and tore them to pieces. Pathetic, he shouted, tossing the scraps aside before storming out of the room. What have I ever done to you? I cried out in despair. I've only tried to do my best to make our lives better. That night, I couldn't sleep. I cried my eyes out. The next day, as he coldly told me, "Get out," without even looking up from his newspaper, I realized we were getting a divorce. Okay, I said, resigning myself. I had been thinking the same thing last night, so I quietly packed my things and left the house. As I stepped outside, my father's face appeared in my mind. He had always doubted this marriage. Why hadn't I listened to his words? Tears welled up in my eyes as I wondered what he would have said if I told him about the divorce. Would he have been angry with me for not heeding his advice? Would he have been disappointed or refused to speak to me? Unable to answer these questions, I started living alone, too afraid to confront him. I found a small apartment with my meager savings, but my ex spread harmful rumors about me, making my new life difficult. I was mentally exhausted. While scanning job ads online, I found a listing for a position at a bakery manufacturer, a job I had once dreamed of. Though I felt too old to change careers, I decided to give it a try. Working at the bakery manufacturer and learning new skills restored my confidence. Once I regained my sense of self, I decided it was time to do something I had been putting off. Visit my father and tell him about my divorce and new career. That night, however, I received a call from my mother, who was sobbing. Your dad passed away in a hospital today. Please come home. The memorial service is the day after tomorrow. The news hit me like a hammer, and my mind went blank. I packed my things in a daze and drove as fast as I could to the ranch. When I arrived, I saw him lying peacefully in a casket. It was too late. I was too late. As I looked at my father's shriveled corpse, the reality of my regrets crashed down on me. I hadn't come clean about my divorce or apologized to him. Why did you leave so soon, Dad? I whispered through my tears. I was going to tell you everything. I'm sorry for not coming sooner. I wept into my pillow all night, unable to sleep. 2 days later, his memorial service took place at the ranch. I was so devastated that I felt like a zombie. Then, unexpectedly, my ex appeared before me, having learned of my father's passing through a mutual friend. I had hoped he would show some respect at the service, but my expectations were quickly shattered. So when are you getting your inheritance? He demanded. Since I took care of you, you need to pay me back for that. He continued. I've been waiting for the country bumpkin to die anyway. This hillbilly memorial is so plain, isn't it? Don't tell me you don't have money. Just sell this useless stuff to get more. This is your chance to prove that marrying you was worth it, even on such a solemn occasion. My ex's behavior was despicable, dishonoring both my father and me. Leave now. There's no place for a slime ball like you here, I said, outraged. But he didn't care and persisted. Pay me, then I'll leave. I don't even want to be in this crappy town. You always complicate things, which is why I divorced you. His cruelty was unbearable. As he continued to press for money and belittle the situation, I felt a deep, angry sadness. He sneered at me, blaming me for our divorce, even though we were at the far corner of the room, away from the others. People were beginning to notice the commotion. Without warning, he put on a scornful smile, as if struck by a brilliant idea, and reached into his pocket. "Here's my contribution to your gift of assistance," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. He then threw coins at me with a flourish, the clinking sound echoing through the room. His dreadful smile never wavered as he picked up a dime from the floor, holding it up as though it were a trophy. I knew exactly what he meant. Where had the kind man who had once given me that lucky silver dime gone? Tears flowed uncontrollably from my despair. Just then, a man in a luxurious suit approached me. "I apologize for my delay. My deepest condolences. I'm very sorry about your father," he said sincerely. My ex looked surprised and shoved me aside. He quickly plastered a broad smile on his face and extended his hand to the man. It turned out the man was an important contact for a big project my ex had been working on. As my ex chatted away, the man glanced at me over his shoulder, his expression a mix of sympathy and curiosity. My ex saw the interaction and began to shame me. "She's my useless ex-wife," he declared, his voice dripping with contempt. "She thinks crying will fix everything. She sits up high on her throne, never intending to improve herself. I'm embarrassed that I was even giving her a lecture." He laughed dismissively, clearly believing he looked authoritative. But the man remained stoic and calm. "I'm retracting the contract with your company." "What?" The color drained from my ex's face. "She's a key person in the project," the man continued, "and I would never associate with a company that humiliates one of my excellent employees in public. If this dull woman is your excellent employee, there must be some mistake." Ignoring my ex, who was now frantic, the man immediately called his boss and announced the contract's cancellation. My ex's phone rang immediately afterward, his voice trembling as he apologized repeatedly. My father's ranch may have been small scale, but its products were known for their exceptional quality, even praised by renowned pastry chefs. By sheer coincidence, I started working at my current job, where my boss was a fan of my father's milk and butter. My refined palate, honed by top-quality ingredients, was valued in my new role. My dad had never disclosed the specifics of his products to my ex, and I had never boasted about my family's business, so my ex never knew the truth. Looking back, I wondered if my dad had been testing my ex's character. After finishing his call, my ex turned to me, his face ashen. He realized his career might be in jeopardy without this project. His demeanor suddenly shifted as he pleaded, "Please talk to him and make him change his mind. I didn't mean to harm you. Please forgive me. I'm sorry, only because I need to save my career." Reaching my boiling point, I let out all my frustration. "You self-centered bastard. Do you think crying will make things better?" Right back at you. "One of the sketches you tore apart that day was the origin of this project. Now you want to sell my Lane Creek made with my dad's milk, which you once said stunk of poverty." The project my ex was working on involved crepes that I had created and supervised, using cream made from my dad's fresh milk. When he learned the details, he snapped. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kicking over chairs in frustration, he was met with a man's calm response. The man stoically picked up the chairs and placed them back. "You may not realize it, but many industry professionals are here. There's no point in resisting anymore. Your misconduct will spread quickly. You have no place here." My ex collapsed onto the floor, desperation etched into his face as he clung to me. "Please help me," he begged. "I'm going to lose everything. I'm so sorry for what I've done. Please just help me." He clung to me, miserable and pleading. I decided to respond with a sweetness that masked my true feelings. As he looked up at me with hopeful eyes, thinking he was saved, I took the lucky silver coin he had given me when we first met out of my purse. I lowered it to his eye level and then deliberately dropped it onto the floor. "You make your own luck," I said coldly. "Hope you understand that someday." He was stunned, frozen in place like a statue. Ironically, the tables had turned, and he began to whimper. "Be quiet," I snapped. "Stop disrupting the memorial. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? You're the lamest person here. Good riddance to bad luck." With nothing left to say or do, he fled the house, tail between his legs. A week after my father's funeral, news broke that my ex, who had been responsible for the project's failure, faced severe repercussions. He was reprimanded by his superiors, and when it was discovered he had embezzled the project budget, was fired and criminally charged. He was left exhausted and broken, his bad deeds catching up with him. He ended up living in a shabby apartment, alone. Meanwhile, my dad's friends and staff, who had inherited his commitment to quality, continued to uphold his legacy. They were expanding their business and maintaining the high standards he had set. The man who had canceled the project contacted me and shared that he had known my dad for many years. He recounted a conversation he'd had with my father after I was hired at his company. "Your daughter is putting a lot of effort into her work, even amidst her divorce," he said. "I want to support her as much as I can." Though he was aware of my divorce, he seemed relieved. "It's heartbreaking to know she was mistreated and that your family was disrespected. Knowing her, I worry that she pushed herself too hard. I'm ashamed I didn't reach out when she was suffering. I hope to see her thrive in her own happiness from now on. Please take care of her." Listening to these words, I couldn't stop crying. Discovering my father's true thoughts and how he cared for me filled me with overwhelming gratitude. Despite the struggles, I now felt hopeful about my future. "I'm sorry, Dad, for not being by your side in your last moments," I said to the sky. "There have been many struggles, but I'm better now. I'm living a full life, learning to be a patissier. I'm going to use all the products you cherished for so many years. Please watch over me from heaven. I love you so much." With my heart full of gratitude, I promised to keep working hard to become the patissier he believed I could be. The message on my smartphone took me by surprise. "My lover is pregnant, so we're getting a divorce. Review the court papers and respond ASAP. Pack your things and leave quickly." I stared at the screen, stunned. He'd been having an affair, and now this. The news of a pregnancy. I tried calling him repeatedly, but he never answered. All I could manage was a simple yes. A month later, after moving out and without saying anything further, I began receiving persistent calls from my ex-husband, whom I had not spoken to since. Despite having nothing left to discuss, I felt compelled to respond. When I finally did, he erupted into rage, screaming at me. Meanwhile, my life with my husband Mark and my mother-in-law had been surprisingly smooth. I had always thought mother-in-law issues were a fictional trope, but I came to appreciate just how wonderful mine was. I heard my coworkers complain about their in-laws and realized how fortunate I was. I made an effort to treat her with more respect and care. When my mother-in-law fell ill and was hospitalized, I started working from home to care for her. Initially, Mark was supposed to be the primary caregiver, but it fell to me. She would smile apologetically in the hospital, saying, "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for being a burden. I wish she could be happy instead." I truly loved her. We'd shared close moments over tea, movies, and shopping. She often joked about my husband, saying he lacked compassion, though it was clear she said it with a hint of loneliness. "He just lies around when he comes home from work," she'd say. "I'll give him a lecture when I get out." Unfortunately, she never had the chance and passed away. After the funeral, I found myself alone at home, reminiscing about her. Her portrait showed her smiling peacefully, but her absence left a void in my heart. My husband hadn't returned home since the funeral, and he hadn't even visited his mother in her final days. There was nothing left to discuss with him, but I felt a deep sadness for my mother-in-law who had left this world without seeing her son one last time. Determined to confront Mark, I tried to locate him. He barely responded to emails and hung up when I called. It wasn't just about reminiscing. There were many unresolved issues between us that needed to be addressed. My voice echoed in the empty house as I waited for him to return. My phone vibrated with a new email notification. It was from Mark. I opened the email, half expecting the same message. "My mistress is pregnant, so I want a divorce. Review the court papers and respond ASAP. Pack your things and leave quickly." I read the message in disbelief. Was this the same woman he was having an affair with? "I can't believe it. She's pregnant." The message on my smartphone left me stunned. I repeatedly tried to reach Nick, but no matter how many times I called, he didn't answer. When the call connected, I only got a recorded message. After 20 years of marriage, was it really ending like this with just one email? As I listened to the dial tone, tears began to overflow. I couldn't hold back my sobs any longer and gave up on the call, throwing my smartphone aside in despair. This was happening too soon after my mother-in-law's death. I hadn't even had the chance to mourn her properly. I tried contacting Nick repeatedly after that, but he never responded. Not to my calls, not to my emails. It seemed our relationship was truly over. We never had any significant conversations about what was happening. I had simply replied yes to his email and left the house. A month has passed since the divorce was finalized. I've rented a room in a single-story house and am experiencing living alone for the first time in 20 years. I'm still working remotely, a necessity I took up to care for my mother-in-law, but now I find it suits me well. The convenience of working from anywhere with just a computer has been surprisingly fitting, and living alone again feels surprisingly comfortable. It's easy to take care of just myself. Caring for my mother-in-law wasn't a burden due to my affection for her, but waiting for Nick's uncertain return had been more stressful than I realized. I once believed Nick wouldn't have an affair. Friends had asked if I had doubts about him, but I laughed it off, thinking he wasn't the type. Now, I've painfully realized that people change. The Nick I was initially attracted to was diligent and loving, although not very successful in his job. Over time, he changed, but the shift was so gradual that I didn't notice it. I should have recognized it when he left all the responsibilities to me. The kind of Nick I once knew no longer exists. Reflecting on it now seems pointless. What I need is a break. As I stood up, trying to lift myself out of my gloomy thoughts, I decided to make some coffee and enjoy the cake I had bought yesterday. The perks of working from home, I mused. As I hurried back to my seat with a cup of coffee and a slice of cake, I savored each bite, feeling quite content, a sign that my mood had improved significantly. My feelings for Nick had completely cooled off. Just as I was pondering this, my smartphone vibrated. I glanced at the screen and saw Nick's name. I didn't want to let him ruin the uplifted mood I had finally achieved, so I chose not to answer. He had ignored my repeated calls before, so ignoring his call now felt like giving him a taste of his own medicine. An eye for an eye, I thought, justifying it to myself. Busy with work, I set my phone to silent mode and placed it a little out of reach. After enjoying my cake, I tried to focus on my tasks, but concentration eluded me. My phone kept vibrating incessantly. As soon as one call ended, another began, causing the phone to buzz repeatedly. Finally, I gave in and answered. "Hello," I began. "What do you think you're doing?" Nick interrupted loudly, cutting me off before I could greet him properly. "I'm about to be kicked out of the tower apartment. Explain this to me." I sighed. I've been wanting to talk to you about that, but he wouldn't answer my calls or reply to my emails. Blaming me is unfair. His yelling from the other end made me shake my head in exasperation. Was he always this difficult? If things continued like this, I might really have to leave. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I sold the apartment," I replied with a sigh. "Sold it?" His voice, initially taken aback, seemed to calm down a bit. "Don't joke with me. That's my tower apartment. Just because we're exes doesn't mean you can do whatever you want." "Your wife is pregnant," I retorted. "Your wife?" "I admire your nerve to say that to me. You know I tried to contact you multiple times, right? Have you forgotten how you ignored all of that?" He probably thought I wasn't angry since I left him quietly, but who wouldn't be angry in such a situation? "I had tried calling and emailing you multiple times about something important. If only you had responded." "Well, I'm busy with work now, so I'll be hanging up. Goodbye." Ignoring his continued shouting, I ended the call. How self-centered could he be? My phone started vibrating again, flashing Nick's name on the screen. Unwilling to answer, I tossed the phone onto the bed and managed to get back to work. I understood why Nick was so anxious, though. Rumor had it that his mistress was a much younger and charming woman. Could such a girl really be attracted to an ordinary man? I had been viewing the situation cynically, assuming it was all about money. For the past few years, Nick hadn't contributed to our living expenses, so perhaps he was spending that money on his mistress. It made sense why he seemed affluent, living in a high-rise apartment. No wonder he appeared attractive to her, even though he wasn't particularly handsome. It turns out, right after moving in, he nearly got kicked out and no longer had the financial ease he once enjoyed. This must have been an unexpected blow for his mistress. Nick was desperate not to fall out of favor with his new wife. In reality, the apartment we lived in belonged to my mother-in-law. She bought it when we decided to move in with her after getting married. I was impressed by her bold decision. "You're newlyweds, but if you're going to live with your mother-in-law, at least I want you to live somewhere nice and convenient," she had said. I was surprised when she actually bought that apartment. Since then, Nick had pretentiously referred to it as the tower apartment. It always felt odd and even uncomfortable when he'd say, "I'm going back to my tower apartment." I remember struggling not to laugh out loud. So, hearing that he was kicked out of the tower apartment might seem funny from the outside, but it was serious for Nick. Meanwhile, my phone on the bed continued to vibrate incessantly. I wondered if Nick felt the same way when he kept receiving calls from me. The thought made me pause my typing. Was my behavior mirroring his? The idea annoyed me instantly. Why was I so irritated? Quickly, I stood up, grabbed the still vibrating phone, and answered the call. "Stop it. What do you want?" I demanded. "You sold my tower mansion," he accused. "Your tower mansion?" I retorted coldly. "That place belonged to your mother. Was it ever really yours? Now that she's gone, it's only natural for her daughter-in-law, who cared for her daily, to take over. I'm appalled that you didn't even bother to visit her in her final days and now claim to be the rightful heir. If you think she left her property to someone like you, that's a joke. That apartment was given to me by your mother. She preferred to leave it to someone who actually cared for her rather than a son who never bothered to visit." "That's not acceptable," Nick protested. "It is accepted. I don't need your permission. It was your mother's property, and she had every right to decide what to do with it. She clearly stated in her will that it should go to me." Talking to Nick was giving me a headache. Was this selfish man really the person I once loved? Why was I attracted to him in the first place? His irresponsible behavior over the past few years had deeply saddened his mother. He refused to contribute financially to the household, broke promises, and complained about my housework. She believed our relationship wouldn't last long because of how he acted. When I heard this from my mother-in-law, I assumed Nick and I would always be together. I reassured her, "Don't worry. Everything will be fine." I never imagined we'd break up so soon after that. She told me, "After you split up, you can either keep the place or sell it. Do whatever you think is best." It was even written in her will. "Stop lying. You must have made that up yourself," Nick shouted. I was frustrated with Nick's constant yelling and lack of consideration. I had tried to communicate properly, but he ignored my messages and simply sent an email asking for a divorce. So I decided to leave and sell the place. "You could have just emailed me about it," I said, tapping my itching temples. I sighed deeply. Did I really need to politely explain to a man who offloaded his parents' care to others and had an affair, via an email he might not even read, that he should reflect on his own actions? His attitude was unbearable. "You should really take a moment to reflect on your behavior," I said, trying to stay calm. "Maybe now you understand how your actions led to this. And one more thing." Before I could finish, Nick hung up, as usual, cutting me off. There was still important information I hadn't shared, but his selfishness always took over. Even though I said it was important, it wasn't really crucial to me, and I knew I shouldn't get too involved in his affairs. After all, Nick was a stranger to me now. The phone went silent, and I was finally able to focus on my work. About 6 months later, as I stood at my mother-in-law's grave, I reflected on selling the apartment. "I'm sorry for selling something you left me, but I'm truly grateful for what you did," I said softly. As I was leaving, I found myself wondering about my ex-husband and his new partner. They must have moved out after the sale of the apartment, but it wasn't my concern anymore. Feeling a bit lonely, I began my journey back home. On the way, I unexpectedly ran into a familiar face. As I suspected, he noticed me and approached, his steps heavy with anger. Behind him, a woman carried a baby. "You made us move into a rundown flat. You got money from selling the luxury apartment. Give me some of it," he demanded. "So, you're still married despite everything?" I responded with a hint of sarcasm. "It's not my fault you're living in a shabby flat. Given your income, it's only fitting you live somewhere like that. The high-rise apartment was an exception." I turned to his young wife. "You really missed out. You were drawn to his wealth, but now he's just an ordinary man," I added, unable to hold back the harsh words. I couldn't help but feel cynical. If you hand over the money, everything will be solved. But it's pitiful for Naomi and the child, don't you think? "Yes, I'm postpartum and not feeling my best," Naomi said, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's just too disheartening to have to live in such a dreadful place, especially for this child." I understood her frustration, given the context. It made sense now, hearing her words from someone who might have an affair. Indeed, it must be a traumatic experience for the child to have you as a parent. "If you want to improve your living conditions," I said, "why not look for a part-time job? You need to live within your means." Their eyes widened in surprise, and they protested vehemently. They argued that a high-rise apartment lifestyle suited them, but I wasn't inclined to listen to all their excuses. From what I gathered, they seemed to overestimate their situation. Despite already living in a modest flat, they had such inflated self-esteem. How honorable can someone who has an affair really be? I asked, my voice unexpectedly cold and sharp. First of all, do you even realize that today is your mother's death anniversary? And yet, here you are, making demands. When I glared at him, he retorted, his voice trembling, but I can't help it. I don't know your address. Stop being so shameless, I snapped. This is pitiful. Even the worst person who had an affair might have been forgiven if they showed some compassion for the deceased. Taking a deep breath, I glanced at Naomi and the baby she was holding before turning back to Nick. There's something important we need to discuss, I said, ready to address the issues at hand. I hadn't had the chance to fully explain before Nick cut me off during our last call. There was something important about that baby I needed to address. There's a strong possibility it might not be his child. Nick's anger flared up again. Don't say such ridiculous things. You think you can just say whatever you want. His voice was heated, but he was clearly rattled. In contrast, Naomi's face had gone pale, showing unmistakable concern. It's clear to anyone that we couldn't have children, I continued. That's why I had it checked out. I wanted a child, so I saw a doctor, but they found no issues with me. I asked you multiple times to go to the hospital, but you never went. So what are you implying? That it's my fault because there's nothing wrong with me? Nick's mocking smile only deepened my frustration. Of course, there's more to the story. You had a high fever as a child, didn't you? Your mother told me that could have caused your infertility. What are you talking about? Nick demanded. The reason your mother gave me the apartment wasn't just gratitude for living there, I explained. There was a bigger reason. It was out of guilt. She felt it was her fault you couldn't have children. She apologized to me for not being able to give me grandchildren. It's not confirmed that your infertility is the cause, but maybe you should consider getting a DNA test done. Nick, who had been listening quietly, lost all his initial momentum. In a somber tone, he told Naomi, "Let's go," and started walking away. As I watched him leave, I remembered something crucial and called out, "Oh, and I'll be demanding alimony for the mental distress, just so you know." With those final words, it felt like the whole ordeal was coming to a close. Several months later, my busy schedule made me answer a call without checking the screen. "It's me. Are you doing well?" Nick's voice came through. Confused, I realized it was Nick calling. "What do you want?" "I'm busy." "Listen, that baby isn't mine." I had doubts about it myself. I realized this because of our conversation. I've divorced Naomi, so how about we start over? His attempt at reconciliation seemed utterly unrealistic. I chuckled lightly. Reconciling after an affair? That's unthinkable. I can tell you're probably struggling living alone and just want to rely on me. I might consider hiring you as my secretary. My affection for Nick had vanished completely, but he was still the only son of my mother-in-law. I thought I was being as generous as possible, but Nick wasn't pleased. "Are you mocking me? Being your secretary? This is your last chance for reconciliation." "I don't need such an opportunity," I replied. "Honestly, you should look at things more objectively." Before I could finish, the call was abruptly cut off. How childish to hang up just because he didn't like my response. Despite my good intentions, he seemed to underestimate them. He would probably continue living in a shabby flat, which was no longer my concern. After blocking all contact with Nick, I returned to my work. I had started a new business with the funds from selling the apartment, establishing a company to support my livelihood. My experience in caring for my mother-in-law and my natural business acumen paid off. The business grew rapidly, and I now had a team of staff members. It's all thanks to my kind mother-in-law. No matter how busy I get, I always make time to visit her grave on the monthly anniversary of her death to express my gratitude for the happy days she helped provide. Nick won't know, but I'll be back next month. With renewed enthusiasm, I focus on my work, determined to make the most of my new life. Has it really been that many years? Is my dad still alive? My ex-husband, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, approached me with a smirk. His voice dripped with sarcasm. Just a short while ago, he'd have done anything to avoid seeing me, so this sudden approach puzzled me. I wondered what had changed. I considered asking him directly but wasn't interested in hearing excuses about the past. From his perspective, I probably looked impassive. His irritation flared, and he snapped, "Well, aren't you going to say anything after all this time? Are you too shy to speak?" His absurd assumption made me chuckle inwardly. Not wanting any misunderstandings, I smiled and gave him the truth. Why would I be shy? Your father recently passed away, and I inherited $7 million from him. The shock on his face was almost amusing. I couldn't help but laugh at his astonishment. I'm Millie, a 48-year-old ordinary housewife. I live happily with my husband and take care of my father-in-law in our home. We married later in life and, due to various reasons, never had children. Sometimes I think it was for the best. I first met my husband over 10 years ago when my company, which I joined after university, competed against his company in a project. After our company won first place in the competition, he approached me at the celebration party. He was genuinely considerate and caring, and we quickly bonded. Despite our busy work schedules, we started dating. Eventually, he proposed. But life wasn't just about romance. His family consisted only of his father, as his mother had passed away when he was young. His father had been a reliable figure in a reputable local factory for years. However, shortly after he graduated from university and started his new life, his father lost his eyesight completely in a factory accident. Living alone became a significant challenge, and his father needed constant support. When my parents learned the situation, they strongly opposed our marriage. Despite their objections, he asked me with tears in his eyes, "I want you to help me support my father." His earnest plea touched me deeply. So, despite our parents' disapproval, we decided to care for his father together. He requested that I take a break from my job to help out, and we ended the contract with the caregiver who had been assisting us. I promised to assist with his father's daily needs, and thus began a new chapter in my life. One that, at the time, I approached with a bit of naive optimism. I accepted his request without much thought, and thus began my daily routine of caring for my father-in-law. However, I soon realized that caregiving was far more challenging than I had anticipated. What shocked me even more was how my husband had changed. Before we married, he was incredibly considerate and attentive, but once we settled into married life, he began to change. For instance, one evening when I was overwhelmed with the demands of caregiving and unable to prepare dinner, he quietly began eating a meal he had bought from a burger shop. While preparing dinner was my responsibility, a simple acknowledgement of my effort, like "it must have been tough for you" or "do you need help," would have made a world of difference. After eating, he left his trash on the table and went straight to bed after a shower. His attitude made me feel isolated, as if I were merely a free helper in his life. This was how our life began. I wish we could communicate and understand each other better. Noticing the tension, my father-in-law gently held my hand and apologized. His kindness brought tears to my eyes. I acted like everything was fine in front of him and said it was okay, but inside, I felt differently. As the days went by, I continued to navigate daily life, struggling with his coldness. One day, I voiced my feelings to him, but he responded, "I'm just taking care of my own stuff," as if he didn't understand my perspective. His response only made me feel more distant. Over time, I gradually adapted to taking care of my father-in-law and managed household tasks more smoothly. As I spent more time with him, our bond deepened, but increasingly, there were nights when my husband wouldn't come home and impromptu meals out became more frequent. I kept telling myself that it was just the two of us, my father-in-law and me, holding things together. Then one day, those words came out of nowhere, and something inside me felt shattered, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of loneliness. "Hey," he started, "lately you haven't been saying my name as often. It's been 2 years since we married, but somehow, the warmth we felt in the beginning has faded. I want to talk. Come to the living room." A naive hope bubbled up within me. Perhaps he was considering mending our relationship. My father-in-law, sensing the tension, had retreated to his room to give us some alone time. With a flicker of hope, I headed to the living room, where a piece of paper lay on the table. He glanced at me and said, "Sit here," and I quietly took the seat next to him. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized the paper. "You know what this is, right?" he said with a grin that lacked the warmth it once had. "I've already sent a petition for divorce to the court." His demeanor was infuriating, but I found myself staring at the paper instead of reacting. "If you don't respond to the court within 30 days, the divorce will be finalized. I just want out of this life." The words felt foreign and disorienting, leaving me speechless. I let out a surprise. "What?" His annoyance was palpable as he casually tossed a pen in my direction. "Do you even understand what I'm saying? I want a divorce." I'm starting a new life with the daughter of a company president, so I need you to speed up the proceedings." His frantic rambling felt like a roller coaster, twisting and turning my heart with each revelation. With all my father-in-law's care and household chores, this was a reality I was struggling to accept. Lately, I had been swamped with work, leaving us little time together. I never imagined that he was having an affair. Then, as I began connecting the dots, his changed attitude, coming home later than usual, and other signs, I struggled to accept the reality of his betrayal. When I thought about the bond we shared and the relationship with my father-in-law, I couldn't grasp how we had ended up here. His eyes were cold, and the determination in his words was unmistakable. Overwhelmed, I found myself at a loss for how to respond. After my father-in-law lost his sight, his hearing had become exceptionally sharp. He could detect even the faintest sounds in the house. Given the age of the home he built, it wasn't soundproof, so he must have overheard our entire conversation. For a moment, I considered seeking my father-in-law's help, but then I realized I couldn't expose him to this turmoil. Continuing in this way would bring no happiness to either of us. This thought weighed heavily on me as I picked up the pen he had tossed and began shakily signing the affidavit. "Finally getting it, huh? Good. Now I can be free," he said, as if it were a victory. "Before you took on caring for my father, we had a caregiver who left at night, so I had to care for him alone, waking up multiple times. It was hard, but after marrying you, I could finally sleep through the night." He spoke as if pleading his case, but I closed off my heart to his words. I no longer wanted to be swayed by him. After I finished signing, he quickly grabbed the papers, carefully checking each word. With a satisfied smirk, he looked at me before leaving the room. I heard him humming as he packed a large bag and hurried out of the house. Watching him leave, I felt a surge of anger and frustration, my cries echoing in the empty space. After he left, the house was enveloped in silence, leaving only me and my blind father-in-law. I lost track of how much time had passed before my father-in-law placed his hand gently on my shoulder. Despite his blindness, I felt as if he understood my feelings. He had probably sensed the earlier confrontation and the tension between us. Our home, though filled with darkness for him, was familiar ground. Even without sight, he could navigate it with ease. Perhaps he had come to check on me, concerned to find me alone and upset. I clung to this sturdy frame, allowing myself to cry freely. I had always cherished caring for him. These moments were precious and gave my life purpose. Yet the change in my ex-husband was painful. The kindness he once showed at the beginning of our marriage had turned into coldness over time, leaving me deeply hurt. I wondered if my focus on his small actions and words was merely a way of justifying my feelings. About 10 years later, feeling a need to break away from my routine, I ventured out for the first time in a while. As I entered the shopping mall, the fresh air, sparkling shop fronts, and the smiles of people around me lifted my spirits. It felt as if the gloomy clouds over my heart were clearing. Then, a voice cut through the pleasant moment, bringing with it a rush of painful memories. "Oh, how many years has it been? Is my dad still alive?" The familiar voice made me tremble. It was my ex-husband. For a moment, everything went dark, but I gathered the courage to look at him. He wore the same smug smile as always, and the unpleasant memories of our past resurfaced. Taking a deep breath, I stared at him, unflinching. I was no longer swayed by his words. I looked him squarely in the eyes, shaking off the shadows of the past and reaffirming my resolve to move forward. When my ex-husband appeared unexpectedly, I was momentarily taken aback and stayed silent. He broke the silence with a smirk. "Aren't you going to say anything? Are you shy after all this time?" I decided to let my mischievous side show and told him about my father-in-law's passing and how I had inherited $7 million. His eyes widened in shock, and I couldn't help but laugh at his astonishment. The thrill of seeing his reaction was exhilarating, and I silently reveled in the moment. "Want to grab a coffee and chat?" I suggested, not really planning to delve further into the inheritance but curious to catch up after such a long time. We sat down, and I mustered the courage to ask about his current situation. He spoke quite openly about his job, revealing that he was doing something different now. His unchanged arrogance was a bit irritating, but I stayed calm, observing his reactions. "So, how are things with the daughter of that company president?" I asked, teasing him slightly. From what he mentioned about his new job, I guess he might have left his previous company. If so, things might not be going smoothly with his new situation. He looked momentarily perplexed, then sighed and said in a low voice, To be honest, things are a bit rocky, but who cares? Is the inheritance story true? Did you really get $7 million? Share some with me. His clear expectation made me chuckle. Why should I share? I replied, your name was indeed in the will. His face showed a mix of surprise and anger as he blurted out, why didn't you tell me? I can't believe you. Feigning surprise, I said, oh, you wanted to hear. I'm sorry. A smirk tugged at my lips as I observed the shock on my ex-husband's face. Inside, I felt a deep sigh. You know, I began, I tried calling you several times back then, but you never answered. I wanted to inform you about your father's passing. In the end, I couldn't reach you, and in his will, your name was indeed listed. However, it clearly stated that you were not to receive a penny. Should I have still informed you? I asked, letting a hint of sarcasm color my voice as I faced his bewildered expression. My mind drifted back to last fall when my father-in-law passed away peacefully. By then, it had been 9 years since our divorce. One evening, I spent some quiet time with him. Usually, he'd fall asleep as soon as he lay down, but that night was different. He sat there, wide awake, showing no signs of sleep. Noting his unusual demeanor, I asked, what's the matter? If you're cold, I can bring you a warmer blanket. He simply pointed to a small box. Open this box tomorrow and call the person whose business card is inside, he instructed in a calm, deliberate tone. Do you have any plans? I asked. He gently shook his head with a smile. No, but look forward to your birthday this year. Every year, my father-in-law would give me something special, a tradition he maintained thanks to the support from his previous employer before he lost his sight. Even after our divorce, his support allowed me to lead a comfortable life without needing to work. The morning after our conversation, the house was unusually silent. The comforting sound of his breathing, which I had grown accustomed to, was absent. The room was still, and I could only sense the passage of time. Good morning, I whispered to the empty room. I softly called out, expecting to hear the familiar response of good morning, but that day was different. An unsettling silence filled the room, and a deep sense of dread began to settle in. I quietly examined my father-in-law's face, and it hit me, he wasn't breathing. His usually calm and steady breaths were absent, and his face, though peaceful, showed no sign of life. When I held his hand, the warmth I'd grown used to was gone, replaced by an unnerving chill. My heart sank as I realized his heart had stopped beating. Panicked, I called for an ambulance, but grief overwhelmed me as memories of his kindness and love surged back. Tears streamed down my face as I recalled the time we spent together, the warmth of his smile, the meals we shared, and his unwavering support even after he went blind. His immense love for me would forever remain in my heart. Wiping my tears away, I gently held his hand and whispered thank you over and over, even though he was no longer with me. His kindness and the memories of our time together would continue to support me. As I tried to compose myself, I noticed a letterbox that reminded me of our conversation the previous night. I carefully opened it to find a business card with a lawyer's name. Tears flowed once more as I recalled his warm voice. I dialed the number on the card. After the funeral, I met with the lawyer who revealed the details of my father-in-law's will. I had inherited more than I had ever imagined from his past company and family wealth accumulated over generations. There was even a clause stipulating that not a single penny would go to my ex-husband. It was clear how much my father-in-law had thought ahead and cared for me. I understood now why my ex-husband was unaware of this. My father-in-law had anticipated our future and kept this from him. Now, with my father-in-law's wishes close to my heart, I found myself sitting across from my ex-husband in a cafe. He looked shocked and confused as I prepared to start a new chapter of my life. With a soft, pleading tone, he said, Lily, please forgive me. I've reflected on my mistakes. Can we start over? His desperation was evident, but I met his plea with a smile. I looked at him and said, Lily? Who's that? My name is Millie. Have you forgotten? I placed the receipt on the table, turned on my heel, and walked out of the cafe. The fresh outdoor air was invigorating, making me feel like a new person. I headed straight to my trusted lawyer's office, equipped with all the necessary details about my ex-husband's recent whereabouts. I was determined to pursue alimony from him. Living in the apartment I had purchased with my inheritance felt like a dream. The views from the windows, the new furniture, and the fresh interior made each day fulfilling and joyful. Occasionally, my lawyer would update me on my ex-husband's situation. It seemed he had been abandoned by the daughter of the company president and had fallen into gambling. The alimony I was requesting only added to the pressure of his already strained situation. Hearing about his struggles made me even more grateful for my new life. My ex-husband tried to contact me through the lawyer, but my lawyer graciously declined on my behalf. This gesture warmed my heart and reminded me of our earlier conversations about my ex. Life was evidently tough for him now. Already burdened by gambling debts, he now had to contend with paying me alimony and juggling various jobs beyond just construction work. I hoped he would learn from his past mistakes and move forward with reflection. On the other hand, each day for me was filled with joy and excitement. My inheritance gave me the opportunity to pursue a long-held dream, opening a flower shop. My father-in-law had always enjoyed having flowers around the house, and it had been a small daily pleasure for him. In his memory, I decided to follow that dream. Now, as I stand on the brink of launching my flower shop, I feel truly joyous and content. My gratitude for my father-in-law's kindness and support is deeply etched in my heart. His legacy has helped me accept the painful past with my ex-husband. Though there are still moments of sadness and regret, I feel like I'm making progress toward my dreams every day. Recalling the days with my ex used to bring tears, but those feelings have significantly subsided. I am now embracing the journey of finding my own happiness, living life at my own pace, and working toward my goals. Each day is a small happiness in itself, and I feel incredibly fulfilled. This afternoon, my husband casually mentioned that my mom is moving in, and instructed me to get all my things out of the room and into the yard before then. I was taken aback, sitting on the couch reading the newspaper, and nearly dropped a plate while doing the dishes in the kitchen. His remark was so unexpected and nonchalant that I was left dumbfounded. Confused, I asked him to clarify. "What do you mean?" He looked at me with a hint of frustration, gripping the newspaper tighter. "Don't you get it? Let me make it simple for you. My mom is moving in. We need the room you're using because she'll need it. So move your stuff to the yard." I was stunned. He had never mentioned this before, and I wished he had at least discussed it with me beforehand. Still, I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "Okay, I'll move everything out." "Good," he replied. "Make sure you do it quickly. Now you'll have a chance to learn some housekeeping skills for Mom." I was speechless. I knew he was close to his mother, but this felt like an extreme measure. I must have been too shocked to respond. It was clear he had asked her to move in without prior notice, and the suddenness of it all left me feeling helpless. With a forced smile, I agreed. "Got it, I'll get everything out." As soon as the conversation ended, I pulled out my smartphone and made a call. I wasn't going to let this go unaddressed. My husband looked at me, puzzled. "Who are you calling?" he asked, but I didn't bother explaining. "Hey, I'm back," I heard a voice call out as soon as my husband Tom returned from work. Tom and I had been married for 2 years. We met shortly after I graduated college and started working for an apparel company, and we quickly fell in love and married. "Welcome home," I greeted him, rushing from the living room to the entrance. "How was your day? What about dinner?" It was a routine I followed to avoid upsetting my domineering husband. "I'm starving. Let's eat first," he said, and I hurried to prepare dinner. "Grilled fish tonight. Looks delicious. Let's eat while it's still hot." We had a pleasant dinner and conversation, but things shifted when I brought up a thought I'd been having. I've been thinking about going back to work soon. We don't have kids yet, and our savings are dwindling. Tom's calm demeanor changed instantly. "Why would you want that?" he asked sharply. "I just think it might help if we increase the household budget a little. That way, I wouldn't need to work," I explained. "Are you saying my income isn't enough?" he snapped. "That's not what I meant at all," I defended. "I'm just suggesting that if the budget were slightly better, I wouldn't need to go back to work." Tom responded curtly, "I give you $250 every month. Isn't that enough?" I had always intended to continue working, but the conversation took a turn I hadn't anticipated. Before we got married, I had made it clear to my husband that I wanted to have children. He didn't agree, preferring that I focus on staying home. The monthly allowance he provided was just $250, which was unrealistic even though we lived in a house inherited from my late grandfather with no mortgage. $250 a month for 2 people was barely enough to cover the basics. I couldn't help but blurt out my frustration. "We can't live on that." Instantly, I clamped my hand over my mouth. But the damage was done. He reacted with anger, shouting, "Why can't you make it work? Where is all that money going? My mom said she could manage on that much." His reaction was fueled by a sense of obligation to his mother. After losing his father in a traffic accident during middle school, he had been raised by her, and it seemed he had developed a deep reliance on her opinions. To him, her word was law, and he expected me to follow it as well. I, too, had lost a parent, my father, when I was in high school, and had been raised by a single mother. But I knew that not all of her opinions were correct. I felt my appetite vanish as I said, "I'm going to bed," and watched him storm off to his room, leaving his meal untouched. The loud footsteps in the hallway seemed deliberately forceful. I questioned myself, wondering why I had married this man. Others might say I should leave him, but despite everything, I still loved him. He was usually a decent person, and I wished he would focus on our relationship rather than his mother. I silently hoped that one day he would turn away from his mother's influence and truly connect with me. With a heavy heart, I began cleaning up dinner, clinging to a faint hope. A few months later, an incident occurred that would irreparably damage our relationship. At dinner, he suddenly announced, "My mother is coming over next Saturday. Make sure you clean up properly." I was caught off guard and replied, "I haven't seen your mother in a while, so I'm a bit nervous." "She's perfect, so just remember that," he said dismissively. I disliked my mother-in-law, and his casual tone only added to my frustration. I hadn't seen her since our wedding, and her condescending behavior and the dissatisfaction she expressed towards me were unforgettable. I recalled her words when I first visited their home for the wedding introduction. "So, you're the one engaged to my son? You seem quite dull. Are you sure you're suitable to marry him?" Back then, I managed to laugh it off, but hearing such a comment directly from her, someone I had just met, left a lasting scar on my heart. I never imagined that such a mother-in-law would come to my house. My husband seemed excited about her visit, cheerfully enjoying dinner while I was overcome with anxiety. My hands were trembling, and I nearly dropped my chopsticks. I was terrified of meeting her, but refusing to meet her would only displease my husband. He soon noticed my unease. "Hey, you okay? You look pale. Are you feeling sick?" I considered saying no, to refuse the meeting with my mother-in-law, but the words that came out were not what I felt. "No, I'm fine really. I'm looking forward to her visit," I lied, not wanting to upset him. He seemed relieved. "You're excited too, right?" "Yeah, I'm excited," I replied, though inside, I was battling my frustration at my own weakness. I forced a smile to avoid his anger and finished dinner. "Thanks for the meal. I'm going to take a bath and sleep," I said. "Okay, good night." I didn't want to think about the impending visit and went to bed early. Yet when I woke up the next morning, I still felt unsettled. As Saturday approached, my health seemed to deteriorate. I never anticipated that meeting her would affect me so deeply. When the day finally arrived, my husband went to pick up his mother, and I waited nervously at home, having cleaned the house meticulously. The doorbell rang in the quiet room, and I jumped up. "She's here," I thought, hurrying to the door. As I opened it, I was greeted with, "Yasmin, it's been a while." "Yes, it has been a while," I managed to reply. But as soon as I faced my mother-in-law, my heart began to pound, and I could feel a tightness in my chest. I was frozen, standing like a statue, until my husband, who had followed behind, prompted me. "What are you doing, Yasmin? If you stand there, my mother can't get in. Please let her in." "Oh, sorry," I stammered, snapping back to reality. "Please come in." I finally led my mother-in-law inside, my heart racing with anxiety about what she might say. The hallway leading to the living room, though short, felt endless. To my surprise, she didn't make any harsh comments as she followed me into the living room. It was cleaner than I had expected, and I thought, maybe I'll avoid any harsh remarks after all. The conversation that followed was more subdued than I anticipated. About 3 hours into her visit, the topic of my husband came up. "You know," she said, "I was surprised you asked Tom to give you more for living expenses." "I didn't ask for more," I corrected. "I just mentioned that I needed a bit extra. There's a difference." Her eyes shifted towards Tom for confirmation. "That's not what Tom told me," she said, clearly seeking his support. We had indeed discussed the issue a few months ago, but I had never demanded anything. "Really, Mom, it's terrible," Tom interjected. "I've been giving her money every month. I can't believe this." His words hit me like a shockwave. Was he trying to curry favor with his mother? "Tom says the same," she continued. You don't even have a mortgage. How much are you getting for living expenses? $250 a month, I said. Even you should understand that's not enough. You've managed a household budget and raised children yourself. You know how difficult it is to live on such a small amount. I was confident she would understand, but her reaction was unexpected. $250? You're getting that much and still asking for more? Where is all the money going? Food and daily necessities, I explained. I don't waste money. The utility bills alone are more than $250, so I've been using my savings. But like Tom, my mother-in-law wasn't sympathetic. You could manage with a bit more savings. You need to be more resourceful. Ideally, I'd be there to guide you on the right way. The suggestion was clear. Living with her was out of the question. I responded with a forced smile. Maybe you're right. I'll try to be more resourceful. Tom looked oddly pleased. Mom's saying this, so why not live together? She can teach you how to manage finances. No way, I thought. I can't handle any more stress. I'm already walking on eggshells around Tom, and adding my mother-in-law into the mix would be unbearable. I'd rather not. I clearly expressed my refusal to my husband, but his annoyance was evident. What? You're rejecting my suggestion? That's exactly what's wrong with you. Mom's just trying to be kind. Let's drop this, Mom, he said, turning to her. Talking to her is pointless. Let's go. He stood up, and together with my mother-in-law, they left the living room. Once they were gone, I felt drained and overwhelmed. My husband, a stable salaried worker earning around $2,000 a month, shouldn't find a slight increase in living expenses problematic. Why was he so reluctant? There had to be a reason. Feeling unwell, I decided to take a nap. When I awoke, it was already deep into the night. What time is it? I wondered, seeing that it was past midnight. I must have slept for hours. My husband had returned and was already asleep in the bedroom, perhaps not waking me out of consideration. My body ached from sleeping on the couch, and I realized it was pointless to do anything at this hour. I crawled into bed and closed my eyes again. The next morning, my husband's announcement was unbelievable. Mom's moving in this afternoon. By then, get all your stuff out in the yard, he said casually while reading the newspaper on the couch. I was in the kitchen doing dishes after breakfast when I accidentally dropped a plate, which shattered loudly. Move everything out into the yard? I asked, bewildered. I approached him for clarification. Huh? What do you mean? I inquired, confused. He looked at me with irritation, gripping the newspaper tightly. You don't get it. I'll say it again, slowly for your benefit. My mother is moving into this house. Got it. It's an absurd idea, but you need to understand. My mind struggled to process the situation. He had never mentioned this before. I wished he had discussed it with me. Despite my shock, I listened without arguing. She needs a spare room, he continued. That's why we're using your room. If there's stuff in the way, just put it all out in the yard. Lucky you. Now you can learn housekeeping from her. I was left speechless. I knew my husband had a strong attachment to his mother, but this was crossing the line. It seemed clear that he must have already discussed living together with her when he returned yesterday. I was stunned by the sudden decision for his mother to move in. Nothing else seemed to matter anymore. Fine, I'll put everything out, I said, barely containing my frustration. Got it. Make sure you do it right. The moment our conversation ended, I pulled out my phone and made a call. I wasn't going to let this go without a response. My husband looked at me, puzzled. Who are you calling? He asked, but I ignored him. I meant what I said. I would move everything out, but I didn't want to live with a mama's boy any longer. If his mother was that important, they could be together. My anger had turned into a deep resentment. Yes, that's right, including the land. Yes, please, I continued, speaking to the real estate agent. My husband's voice grew louder and more impatient as he shouted, Are you even listening? Stop making calls on your own. I continued talking, undisturbed. This house, inherited from my grandfather, was now my property, and I had the right to do whatever I wished with it. If my husband and mother-in-law were making unilateral decisions, so could I. After ending the call, I finally turned to my husband. Stop it. You're being so noisy. Can't you see I'm on the phone? It's incredibly rude. What kind of way is that to talk to your husband? He snapped back, clearly annoyed. I can't stand this any longer, I retorted. You act so superior, but you don't even contribute properly to our living expenses. How are you any better? You make nearly $2,000 a month but only give me $250. Where is the rest of the money going? Are you having an affair or something? His face turned red with rage. He slammed the newspaper onto the floor and grabbed me by the collar. An affair? Don't joke about that. Why would you accuse me of that when I'm working hard every day? Despite his anger, I remained calm. Then why don't you contribute more to our household? If you're not doing anything wrong, there's no reason you can't. I'm not asking for all your salary, nor have I restricted your allowance. His tone softened slightly. Well, yes, but men have their own social obligations, he said, still defensive. I see, so you expect me to handle everything at home while you enjoy yourself outside. I'm just a convenient housekeeper to you. His grip on my collar loosened, indicating I had hit a nerve. He attempted to change the subject, but I was clear. Anyway, my mother will be moving in today. I might increase the living expenses a bit, he said, heading back to the living room. I called after him. That's fine, but I'm not planning to live together. If you really want to live here with your mother, I'll leave. He turned back, clearly surprised. I couldn't imagine continuing to live with him and my mother-in-law under these circumstances. Exhausted from this life, I kept my gaze cold. He noticed and approached me again. Are you really going to leave? Of course, I'm leaving right away, I replied firmly. Just wait a moment. I went to my room and returned with copies of the petition for divorce, marriage certificate, and summons from the court. I handed them to him as he slumped on the sofa. Here, look at these. Are you sure about this? Don't come back regretting it. I have no regrets, I said, my voice steady. Just read it carefully and respond to the court. My determination is firm. I just want to cut ties with this mama's boy as quickly as possible. From now on, I'll leave everything to my lawyer. Well, thank you for everything, I added, preparing to leave with my belongings. There's no alimony, right? I haven't done anything wrong, I asked, making sure. Sure, that works for me, he replied, relieved. To avoid any trouble later, let's agree in writing not to divide any assets. His face softened, clearly relieved not to have to pay alimony. We signed an agreement to forgo any alimony and not to divide any property. This formalized the end of our marriage. An hour later, just as I was about to leave with my packed belongings, my mother-in-law arrived. Where are you going with all that luggage? She asked. I'm leaving this house, I said. Please discuss the details with Tom. I wish you both happiness, I said with a smile, feeling the sense of liberation. The prospect of never seeing them again made my heart lighter. The world outside seemed brighter than ever. It had been a long time since I felt this clear-headed. First, I went to see my lawyer to discuss the next steps, then visited a real estate agent to arrange a new flat. I couldn't move in immediately, so I spent the week in a hotel. I hadn't heard from my ex-husband, and I figured he and his mother were probably settling into their new routine. That was until he called. Speak of the devil, I muttered, answering the phone. He sounded furious. What's this about an eviction notice? He shouted. Calm down. What's happened? I replied, brushing my teeth in the bathroom. I set the phone down to rinse my mouth, but his angry voice still reached me faintly. What are you doing? This isn't a joke, he snapped. I picked up the phone again and moved to the bedroom. You never change, always so angry, I said, but let it go. Never mind that. Answer me, he demanded. All right, the eviction notice. The house you and your mother are living in no longer belongs to anyone. That's probably why you received it, I explained. He seemed bewildered. You don't understand, so I'll explain again, I said firmly. I hold the rights to that house. It's now owned by the real estate company and is going to be sold. No way. That's so unfair. You didn't tell me about something this important, he yelled, shocked and enraged. You didn't share anything significant with me either. You decided to live with your mother without consulting me. It's too late now. If you don't hurry up with the move-out process, you'll be reported, I said coldly. That house was our joint property. You can't just sell it like that. It's invalid. Cancel it, he protested. Are you stupid? Did you forget we both signed an agreement that there would be no division of assets? That house was mine from the start, and I can do whatever I want with it, I said, pushing him away. His reaction confirmed he had completely forgotten the terms of the contract. His disregard for everything related to me had worn me down. I felt a wave of disappointment as I tried to end the call. Are we done? Do you understand now? This is the last time I'm discussing this, I said, preparing to hang up. Hey, wait, we have nowhere to go if we get kicked out suddenly, he exclaimed. That's not my problem. You've been stingy all this time, so you must have plenty of money. Figure it out. Why don't you rent a flat or a house? I responded coldly before ending the call. His once assertive tone faltered, and he began stumbling over his words. I don't have any money. I don't have any savings. I can't believe it. How can an adult have no savings at all? How unplanned can he be? My indignation flared. If he'd been in front of me, I might have struck him. Really hopeless, I muttered, shaking my head. I was right to divorce you. You're old enough to have savings, yet you contributed nothing to living expenses and just squandered money. There's no way I'm helping you. His pleading only steeled my resolve. Please, just a little bit, he started. Why don't you ask your mother? That's a good idea. So goodbye, mama's boy. Don't ever contact me again. I ended the call with finality and immediately blocked his number. Why should I help someone like him? If he seriously thought he'd get aid from me, he was mistaken. After everything was settled, I lay down on the soft bed of my new place, gazed at the ceiling, and proudly gave it the middle finger. 2 weeks later, I moved into my new flat. It's smaller than my old house, but it's clean and I feel quite content. My ex-husband and his mother eventually left the house. The real estate agent informed me they resisted initially but vacated when threatened with police involvement. They had underestimated me even after the divorce. I resumed my old job and the warm welcome from my colleagues was heartening. One day, a colleague invited me to lunch and asked, "Is it okay if I ask why you got divorced?" Well, it's complicated, I said. Let's talk about it over drinks sometime. But I do have a question. I haven't seen Tom around lately. What happened? Oh right, you don't know, my colleague said, their expression changing. Tom officially resigned due to distress, but the truth is, he was fired for embezzling company funds. It happened around the time you left. Embezzlement? I was stunned. How much did he embezzle? About $220,000, my colleague replied. I was so shocked I stood up, raising my voice. The other diners turned to look at us. Keep it down, my colleague whispered. Sorry, but that's a huge amount. Didn't he get caught? The boss wanted to handle it quietly, they explained. Tom didn't go to the police, but if he doesn't repay the money soon, he might be reported. Those are just rumors though. The full story isn't clear. As I processed the news, I realized it wasn't entirely surprising given his character. Always concerned with appearances and squandering money on socializing, his downfall was predictable. But it was no longer my concern. I'm still young, and I want to build a new life and find happiness with someone who truly cares for me. After talking with my colleague, my resolve to move forward only strengthened. My name is Meline, and I'm 38 years old. I married my husband, Kenneth, who is 4 years older than me, 8 years ago. My life took a dramatic turn when my beloved father passed away due to illness, leaving me with a substantial inheritance. I used this fortune to purchase a new house, which I adore. The scent of fresh wood brings me comfort. I often think that my father would be pleased to see this new home. Our old house, where my father lived alone after my marriage and my mother's passing, was just a 15-minute walk from our apartment. Following my father's fall a few years ago, he passed away recently. With the inheritance, I decided to demolish the old family home and build a new one. I've always believed that even though the old house is gone, the happy memories will remain in our hearts. Kenneth often echoed my father's words about building a new home as a way to start afresh. At first, I thought Kenneth was just trying to cheer me up, but it soon became clear that this wasn't the case. Kenneth, I need you to fill out the divorce papers and submit them to the appropriate place. Divorce papers? What do you mean? I asked, bewildered. Yes, exactly that. We're getting divorced. I want you to submit the divorce papers. This is not a joke. I never intended to live with you in this house. This new home, built with your father's inheritance, is meant for my mistress. She and I will be living here together. His words were astonishing. Mistress, you've been cheating on me. Yes, if I had met her before I met you, I wouldn't have married you. She's different, cute, kind, and genuinely loves me. We've been together for about 6 months. She approached me knowing I was married, but she didn't mind. She's happy just being with me and says the sweetest things. I should never have married someone as serious and uptight as you. Coming home to you was never enjoyable." He continued, "I've decided to take this house as alimony. After 8 years of marriage without children, what benefit is there in staying married to you?" I was overwhelmed and sought comfort from Kenneth, only to be met with unexpected blame. "You're acting like a victim, but this is all your fault. If you had fulfilled your role, no one would stray. It's your responsibility that men are drawn to other women. You're to blame for the affair, the divorce, and losing the new house. It's wrong to play the victim or to resent me for this," he asserted. He claimed his infidelity was my fault and then handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, puzzled. "It's your alimony. I don't want any hassle later, so I'm giving it to you now. Be thankful." Inside the envelope was $1,000. As he took the new house, built with my father's inheritance, to live with his mistress, he tossed me the money. I calmly returned the envelope. "Fine, I accept the divorce. If you don't love me, there's no point in staying married. I don't need the money." He seemed taken aback by how easily I accepted the divorce. "Well, if you say so. Just don't ask for it back later." Kenneth packed his things and left a few days later, taking the keys to the new house with him. However, shortly after, my now ex-husband frantically called me, clearly agitated. "What did you do?" "The police came to the house, talking about warrants and charges of trespassing." "What's going on?" According to him, the police had arrived while he was with his mistress at the new house. "Hello, we're the police. You understand why we're here, right?" "The police? What for?" "Well, this is your ex-wife's house. Entering with a stolen key is illegal, both theft and trespassing. You understand?" Kenneth, shocked and bewildered, looked at his mistress, who was equally confused. "What's going on? Isn't this your house? You said you wanted to show me." "Be quiet and stay out of this. Sorry to interrupt your domestic dispute, but we have a warrant. Could we discuss this at the station?" Caught between the police and his mistress, Kenneth called me in a panic. "Why is this happening all of a sudden? What did you do?" "I haven't done much. I simply reported that my house keys were stolen and that strangers were in my home. It's only natural to call the police." I promptly filed the divorce papers, reverted to my maiden name, Milline Baker, and reported the situation to the police. "This is my house. Didn't you agree to give it to us as alimony?" Kenneth argued. "I never agreed to that," I countered. "It's convenient for you to twist things to fit your narrative." "Are you joking? How can you think that house is yours? I'm the one on the house contract. I paid for it with my inheritance from my father. Plus, I own the land." "But your father said it was for us," Kenneth protested. "That was when you were my husband. Now we're divorced and strangers. Why would you think it's your land?" My father had transferred the land rights to me when he fell ill to prevent any complications if something happened to him. He must have anticipated a situation like this. Maybe that's why he advised demolishing the old house and building a new one. Money can be taken easily, but a house, now that's different. Kenneth's calm demeanor suddenly made sense. "So you were planning this all along?" "I did nothing. You misunderstood everything and left. It was almost amusing watching you walk away, clueless. Too bad you were about to be happy with your mistress." "Stop being ridiculous. You blame me for the affair, the divorce, and losing the house. How does it feel now, stuck between your girlfriend and the police?" Kenneth could only groan in response. "Hating me is misplaced. This situation is entirely your fault. Ever heard of you reap what you sow? This is what you deserve." As soon as I said this, Kenneth exploded in rage on the phone, shouting accusations. Then suddenly, his voice faded. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Smith's ex-wife? He's causing a disturbance at your house. Could we have a word, please?" It seemed a police officer had taken over the call. I explained the situation to the officer, who sympathetically acknowledged how tough it must have been. Later, Kenneth and his mistress were taken to the station. Kenneth continued to insist that the house was given to him by his ex-wife and that it wasn't trespassing. His mistress, genuinely surprised, stated that she had no knowledge of trespassing. Kenneth claimed he had evidence to support his case and presented it at the station. Ultimately, the mistress's statement was deemed credible, and she was released with a warning. Kenneth, however, was found guilty of theft and trespassing and was fined. The issue now was that Kenneth had named me as his guarantor upon his release, likely because he didn't want his strict parents to know. The officer, clearly exasperated, informed me of the situation. Why should I be his guarantor? We're divorced and strangers now, I replied firmly. I have no connection with Mr. Smith anymore, so I refuse. You say he has no one else to turn to, but his parents live nearby. Please contact them. The officer relayed this to Kenneth, who was evidently frustrated. His parents were already aware of our divorce due to his infidelity, but they were unaware of his attempt to take the new house. The police call had informed them of the entire situation. Reluctantly, I visited Kenneth's parents' house after they requested more details. I knocked on the door and apologized. I'm sorry I couldn't explain the situation earlier. No need to apologize, his mother replied. It's all my foolish son's fault. But did you know about this? No, about what? I asked. Well, my son is here with his mistress, a much younger woman. We let them in to talk, but I'm not sure what he's thinking. To my surprise, Kenneth had brought his mistress into the living room. The scene was as described: Kenneth, the young woman, and my stern-looking father-in-law, Tom. Tom, it's been a while. I'm sorry for the delay, I said. Milan, thanks for coming. I apologize for calling you after the divorce, but I've heard Kenneth's side of the story. However, I can't fully trust someone who's been arrested for trespassing. Can you tell me your side? I recounted everything as requested. Throughout my explanation, Kenneth and his mistress kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. What were you thinking, trying to take Milan's new house? Are you insane? Kenneth's father demanded. It's not that simple, Kenneth interjected. We resolved this between us. Resolved? How is that possible? Tom retorted. Your story is completely different from hers. Apparently, Kenneth spun his own version before I arrived. What were you told? I asked. Kenneth's father said he claimed you willingly transferred the house to him, then changed your story and reported him, leading to his wrongful arrest. Really? He said that. I was incredulous. It's true that when we discussed the house, I didn't object. But that doesn't mean I agreed to transfer ownership. To suddenly claim the house as yours and report it, it's beyond comprehension. I'm so sorry, Milan, for having such a son, Kenneth's mother said. What are you saying, Mom? I'm telling the truth. Milan wasn't agreeing. She was too stunned to speak. How could you misunderstand and still claim to be her husband? I nodded in agreement with Tom. Despite everything, Kenneth continued to make excuses. Anyway, you never mentioned owning the land. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done this. If I had told you, you'd have found another excuse to do the same thing, I replied. How can you say that? Were you spending a lot on her? Kenneth asked, gesturing towards his mistress. No, why would you think that? I responded. Right after our divorce, I happened to run into one of your colleagues. When I mentioned the divorce, I received some shocking information that left me reeling. Figures, Kenneth's colleague said, looking uncomfortable. No offense, but I thought it might happen. What do you mean? Didn't he tell you? I asked. The colleague shifted uncomfortably before spilling everything. I should have mentioned this sooner, but I wasn't in a position to tell you. Kenneth has been bragging about his mistress, a woman 20 years younger. He was showing off, buying her expensive bags and jewelry. He said he didn't know how to contact you to inform you. He's been very open about his plans. The colleague continued. Kenneth even mentioned a decisive conversation he had. He said he was planning to divorce you to marry his mistress. Apparently, her father passed away, and they're building a new house with the inheritance. Kenneth planned to claim the house in the divorce. He said, once the house is built, I'll divorce Milan and somehow claim it. No matter the opposition, I'll get it, and then my young new wife and I will live in the big house. Kenneth had been showering his mistress with gifts for some time, it seemed. The house built with my father's inheritance was intended as a grand gesture to propose to her. I've heard everything. Do you still insist you did nothing wrong? I asked, sweating with frustration. Kenneth stammered, well, yes, I bought her gifts. So what? I used my own money and gave Milan her living expenses. She's not my destined partner. This woman is. I brought her here today to announce our marriage. Are you out of your mind? His parents exclaimed in shock. The most surprising response came from the mistress. Marry you? Did I ever say that? We're not even dating. What do you mean? Kenneth asked, bewildered. Exactly that, she replied. I'm not in a relationship with him. I only approached him for a sugar daddy arrangement. I told you from the start that I was looking for someone for that kind of arrangement, and even married men were acceptable. You agreed to it initially, but now? What are you talking about? That's creepy, the mistress said. Kenneth went pale at this revelation, unable to speak. I asked, so why did you come here with him today? The mistress explained, I came to ask for more time to pay the alimony. I knew he was married, so it's an affair, and I'm prepared to pay the alimony. But I'm still a student. A student? How old are you? Tom, Kenneth's father, interjected, looking bewildered. I'm 22. I lost my parents early and have been doing sugar dating to pay for college. I sold all the gifts for living expenses, so I don't have savings. I can show you my bank account. I've just secured a job and can start paying alimony from my salary. So, you came here to ask me to wait for the alimony? I asked. Yes, that's right, she confirmed. Kenneth, who had been listening in silence, erupted in anger. Didn't you hear her? Unfortunately, she never intended to marry or even date you. But that's separate from the alimony you owe. And what about saying you wanted a house? The mistress responded, I meant I'd want a house someday when I marry. It wasn't about marrying you. What? Kenneth exclaimed. I was suddenly taken to that house, thinking it was yours. Then the police came, and I learned it was actually your wife's. She bowed deeply to me, indicating that all of this was due to Kenneth's misunderstandings. Kenneth stood dazed, clearly in shock. All right, I said, if you promise to pay the alimony properly, I'll wait for the payment. But promise me no more sugar dating. It might not end simply next time. I promise I'll never do it again, she said earnestly. I turned to Kenneth. Expect a claim for alimony from me without delay. Alimony? What are you talking about? Kenneth asked, taken aback and not expecting to pay alimony himself. You said you didn't need alimony when you returned the money, I reminded him. I gave you $1,000 and now you're asking for more? That's not what we agreed on, Kenneth protested. I don't recall any agreement, I said. You returned the $1,000 I gave you saying you didn't need it. What I meant was that I didn't need such a trivial amount for alimony. Do you have any idea how much alimony for infidelity is? It's $11,000, I replied, and you're also at fault for not having children in the 8 years we were married. At that moment, a loud slap echoed through the room. Someone asked, What are you doing, Kenneth? He held his cheek, clearly stunned by the impact. I asked, Are you serious? Do you really think her inability to have children is her fault? Enough with your jokes, Dad, Kenneth's father interrupted. Don't tell me you're blaming Maline for your affair too. Well, that's how it is, Kenneth said. I should have never married her. It's like fraud. How could you think that? I challenged. Your parents wanted grandchildren. If she couldn't get pregnant, they thought it was better to split up. That's why I chose her. If you truly believe that, Kenneth's father said, then we must have raised you wrong. It took your mother 10 years to conceive you. She was heartbroken hearing about others having children quickly and went through intense treatments until you were born. Did you think pregnancy is solely the woman's responsibility? Is that why you could cheat so easily? If you really cared about her, you wouldn't have done what you did. This isn't Maline's fault, Kenneth's father continued. It's all due to your thoughts and actions. I was learning this for the first time too. Kenneth's mother, Jane, had struggled for 10 years to have him. Tears streamed down her face as she silently listened. Carly, Tom said, leave this house now. Why? Kenneth asked, bewildered. You're a long-awaited son. I can't bear to look at you now, Tom said. Don't come back until you truly understand your mistakes. Where should I go? Kenneth asked. Back to our apartment. That apartment has already been canceled, I said. With the new house, there was no need to keep it. I canceled it right after reporting to the police. There's no place for you to return. Kenneth was shocked to realize he had nowhere to go. In frustration, he started blaming his mistress. It's your fault. All the money I spent, and now you say you never intended to marry me. It's fraud. She remained calm and replied, I was clear about it being a sugar relationship from the start. I never asked for money or gifts. If you want to sue me, go ahead, but I have proof of our arrangement. And don't forget the alimony, I said. Kenneth seemed flustered. Wait, please wait. I contacted his parents with her and then left their house. Later, I hired a lawyer and sent a demand letter for the alimony. I didn't send it to his parents' house, knowing he no longer lived there. Why is it being sent here? Kenneth's workplace receptionist asked as she looked at the letter. It's possible to send such documents to both residential and employment addresses, I explained. This is regarding the alimony. Is that what this is about? She asked, noticing Kenneth's pale face. You look so shaken. Didn't you inform him? I did, I confirmed. I just told the truth. No one asked me to keep quiet. It's his own doing. The arrival of the demand letter at Kenneth's workplace spread news about his actions, including his sugar dating and the subsequent loss of everything. Overcome with embarrassment, Kenneth couldn't handle the gossip and resigned, claiming he was leaving on his own terms. His troubles didn't end there. He sought free legal advice, claiming he was a victim of marriage fraud. The response was discouraging. We see cases like this, but with the evidence you provided, it's not considered fraud. You agreed that it was a sugar relationship from the start, the advisor said. If you developed feelings later, that was one-sided. We won't stop you from suing, but it's likely a waste of money. Kenneth decided not to pursue the lawsuit based on this advice. Eventually, he came to me, defeated. I don't know what I was thinking. I overlooked how important you were even after 8 years together. I promise this time, I'll make you happy and won't be distracted by anyone else, he pleaded. Naturally, his plea over the phone didn't sway me. My response was resolute. I refuse. Why? After all this begging, I realized over these 8 years that you are a terrible person. You try to blame everything on me and take what's mine, then shamelessly come back after losing it all. What benefit would there be for me to reunite with someone so selfish? Kenneth protested. You don't have to put it that way. You once said the same things to me. Anyway, never contact me again, I said firmly, though given your situation, I doubt you can. I hung up, deleted all his contact information, and changed my phone number. However, a few days later, something unexpected happened. Your ex-husband came to the house the other day, one of the neighbors said. We had to chase him away after he caused a commotion. What was he thinking? I asked, astonished. The neighborhood ladies who were aware of the situation pretended to call the police to drive him away. Since then, I haven't seen him. I don't know where he is or what he's doing, but I'm confident he isn't leading a happy life. Hello, I looked in my wallet and couldn't find my credit card. Do you know anything about it? Oh, you noticed already. I thought it might take you a bit longer, considering your age. Wait a minute. Are you saying you're the one who spent $50,000 without permission? That's outrageous. It's not as bad as it sounds. It was just for my wife's birthday. I borrowed the card to book a stay in an ultra-luxurious 5-star hotel suite. It costs about $110,000 a night, and we stayed for 5 nights. It was an amazing experience. I'm even thinking of going to another country next. See you later. Hold on a second. I haven't spoken to my son in 30 years. I raised my 2 boys on my own after divorcing my husband. My younger son has always been there for me, but my older son is a different story. Recently, he came to the house, took my credit card from my wallet, and spent $50,000 at a luxury hotel. His actions are both criminal and heartless. I supported him through everything, but now, I can't even think of him as my son. 2 minutes later, I made a decision and called his wife. Hello, my son is there, isn't he? I've contacted the card company and had the credit card stopped. I'm also planning to report the theft and unauthorized use to the police. After ending the call, I blocked their numbers. I can only imagine their panic and confusion now that the card is stopped. They were planning to travel to another country, so they likely don't have return tickets. They're going to face some serious trouble. A week later, they had no choice but to apologize. I'm a 65-year-old woman living alone in New York. Since divorcing my husband 30 years ago, I've raised my 2 sons by myself. I'm retired now and enjoying my leisure time. Mom, I bought your favorite donuts, my younger son said when he visited. Thank you, you didn't have to go out of your way, I replied. My younger son often visits even after moving out. He works for a company with good benefits and can get home on time. He's single, so he stays over if the next day is a day off. It's not that he hasn't become independent. He just worries about me living alone. I can manage on my own, but I appreciate his thoughtfulness. On the other hand, when my eldest son and his wife visit our family home, things never go well. I don't really welcome their visits. Hey, can you lend me some money? We have our wedding anniversary coming up next week, and we're planning a trip abroad. We need some extra funds, my eldest son asked. Why don't you use your own savings if you need money? I suggested. I can't save anything with my salary, he complained. You live in a nice new apartment and just bought a new car. Isn't that the result of your own choices? I pointed out. Please, I'll pay you back. Don't be so harsh, he pleaded. Ever since my eldest son started living on his own after graduating from high school, he's often borrowed money from me. After he got married, the amounts he asked for only increased, and I can't recall a single time when he actually repaid any of it. I don't want to lend money to someone who doesn't keep their promises, even if they're family. Shouldn't people honor their commitments? I didn't raise him to disregard such basic values, but he's grown into someone who relies too heavily on his parents' wallet. Fortunately, I received a substantial amount from my retirement fund and have been investing wisely, so I'm not struggling financially. However, I want to avoid unnecessary spending as I consider my future. Yet, as a mother, I find it hard to say no when my son is truly in need. I think I should be stricter, but every time he asks, I end up giving in. Then one day, my eldest son and his wife showed up unexpectedly. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "I got into a car accident, and we need a substantial amount of money. We don't have much savings, but we've been told we'll be sued if we don't pay." "A car accident?" I was shocked. "I've been working hard to repay a large debt to you, and I guess I was too tired," he explained. Hearing about the accident, I felt a mix of surprise and relief that they were both safe. Maybe my demands for repayment had stressed them out. While I wasn't directly to blame, I couldn't help but feel somewhat responsible. Up until now, they had asked for money for their own needs, but this situation was different. This was an emergency, and there seemed to be no other option. "Okay, I'll prepare the money. How much do you need?" I asked. $30,000, he replied. "What?" I was shocked at the enormous amount. $30,000? That seems like a rip-off, I thought, but I knew that damages and compensation could add up quickly. I didn't notice a single injury on my eldest son or his wife. It didn't seem like the accident was that serious. Perhaps the other party involved held a special position, but still, paying such a large sum didn't make sense. Why was it so expensive? The other person was driving a luxury car, and the repair costs are quite high, my son explained. "But shouldn't insurance cover the repairs?" I asked. "We didn't have insurance, so we have to bear the full costs ourselves. We're in serious trouble if we can't pay this amount. Can you help us out?" With that, my son and his wife bowed their heads to me, a gesture I'd never seen from them before. They must be truly desperate. I sighed. I guess I have no choice. We're family, after all, and I should help my family in trouble. Reluctantly, I agreed. "Okay, I'll arrange the money, but make sure you pay me back." "Yes, thank you. Of course we'll repay you," they promised. I prepared the money, considering it a loan. But after that, I heard nothing from my son or his wife. A week passed, and I started to wonder how the situation with the accident had been resolved. Then, when I went shopping for the first time in a while, I reached into my wallet to pay and realized 3 of my credit cards were missing. No way, I thought. I hadn't used this wallet recently, and I hadn't left it anywhere. There were no signs of a break-in at home, and the cash was still there. What was going on? As I panicked, I realized that I hadn't used my wallet or even left the house in the past week. When I hurriedly contacted the credit card company, I was shocked to learn that $50,000 had recently been spent. What's going on? I thought. The only visitors I'd had were my eldest son and his wife. Could they be involved? Feeling uneasy, I immediately called my eldest son. "Hello, can you talk right now?" I asked. "Yeah, sure, Mom, but it's rare to get a call from you," he replied, sounding unusually cheerful. His tone made me wonder if he had been drinking, even though he should have been preoccupied with the accident. The thought that he might be drinking this early infuriated me. What was he thinking? "Are you drinking by any chance?" I asked, my irritation growing. "No, it's not like that. What are you talking about?" he responded, sounding defensive. "Have you seen my credit cards? They're missing from my wallet," I pressed, hoping I was wrong. "Oh, you noticed already? I thought it would take a bit longer for you to find out. I'm surprised you caught on so quickly," he said with a smug tone. "What do you mean?" I asked, dread washing over me as I began to realize what he was implying. Could it be that my eldest son and his wife had taken my credit cards without permission? It felt like theft, plain and simple. I didn't want to believe it, but after hearing what he said, I couldn't think of any other explanation. There had been no signs of a break-in, so they were the only suspects. But I never expected him to admit it so easily. I was too shocked to respond at first, but my son continued talking. "We've just been using a bit of your money. Your credit card is really convenient, you know. We're on vacation for my wife's birthday, staying in a top-tier suite. The whole trip, including the hotel, is costing about $50,000. It's nice not having to worry about money. This couldn't be my son. Someone must be impersonating him over the phone. That's what I desperately wanted to believe. But deep down, I knew it was him, revealing a side of himself I had never seen in over 30 years. Betrayed by my own family, my heart broke, and I was at a loss for words. Why would he do this to me? Was he really my son? Oblivious to my feelings, he seemed to be enjoying himself. You think it's okay to use someone else's credit card without permission? Don't you know the difference between right and wrong? And you haven't even repaid the money from the accident. Why? No report, no repayment, and now you're stealing my cards? It's just unbelievable. The words burst out of me in a wave of emotion. I just wanted him to apologize. One simple word, and maybe I could find it in me to forgive him. But instead of the apology I longed for, I heard his wife's voice on the other end. Mom, you've saved up quite a bit of money, right? So it shouldn't be a problem if we use a little. Money is meant to be spent, not just saved. That's right, my son chimed in. I'm really lucky to have such a smart wife. We're going to enjoy ourselves, so don't contact us anymore. With that, he hung up the phone. A clever daughter-in-law? What does this all mean? Could it be that she's the mastermind behind all of this, manipulating my son? The thought shifted my perspective slightly. But regardless of who initiated it, this was a crime. Using a credit card without permission, even among family, is theft. What were they thinking? Anger surged within me, and it took time to regain my composure. But at least now I had a clear grasp of the situation. I had a plan in mind. After hanging up the phone, I waited about 2 minutes before calling again. This time, my eldest son's wife answered. Hello? Do you need something? I told you we're on vacation. You shouldn't be contacting us. This call is a courtesy, I replied calmly. Her dismissive tone didn't faze me. A courtesy? What are you talking about? She asked, sounding slightly annoyed. I've notified the credit card company about the unauthorized use and had the card stopped. Don't be surprised when it stops working. I informed her, letting my words sink in. You did what? How are we supposed to pay for things now? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. Lending and borrowing credit cards is not allowed, and this is clearly unauthorized use. Did you really think I would just overlook it? That's incredibly naive. What do you mean you stopped the card? We need it. We don't even have tickets for the return flight. Call the credit card company right now and get it reinstated, or we'll be in serious trouble, she insisted, her tone turning desperate. If they truly needed help, they could have asked for it humbly like they did during the last incident. But after seeing their true colors, it was clear that any expectation of decency was futile. I wasn't angry anymore, just astonished by their audacity. I ended the call and immediately blocked their number, along with any messages. I had no desire to speak to them again or even see their faces. No matter how much they begged, I couldn't bring myself to help them this time. Then I contacted my younger son. I warned him, they might cause you some trouble. A week later, my younger son called. Mom, it's about my older brother. I've decided to pay the money for now, so they'll be coming back soon. But I'm worried they might hold a grudge against you. Don't worry, I reassured him. I'll handle it if they come. I knew my eldest son and his wife were likely to blame me, completely ignoring their own actions, but I was ready for whatever came next. I felt guilty about involving my younger son, but I was determined to be even stricter when they returned. With this resolve, I waited for them to come home. The next day, as I had expected, they showed up. Mom, why did you do this? Do you realize how much trouble we were in stranded abroad without a single acquaintance? Have you ever considered how desperate we felt? They began yelling at me the moment they walked through the door. How foolish, I thought. It became clear to me once again that only fools try to win arguments by raising their voices. If they had just explained their situation logically, maybe I could have understood. But they showed no intention of apologizing. You always just shout like barking dogs. But honestly, I never expected anything different from you, I said calmly. You have two choices. Either call the police yourself or repay the full amount right now. What? Police? What are you talking about? Don't joke with me. You're the one who stopped the credit card and left us in that mess. Shouldn't you be taking responsibility for that? I couldn't help but wonder what kind of upbringing leads to such a lack of understanding. In over 60 years of life, I never thought I'd encounter people like this, but I was serious. Do you realize that using someone else's card without their permission is considered fraud against the credit card company? Even if we're family, sharing cards is not allowed. Reporting this to the police will only cause trouble for you. Wouldn't you rather just repay the full amount? You should be thankful I haven't reported you yet. But we don't have the money right now, you know that, they protested. Oh, and about that story you told me about the traffic accident. I already know it was a lie. I want that money back too. Their reaction was priceless, eyes wide and mouths agape in shock. I couldn't help but laugh inwardly. If they thought I was clueless, they were sorely mistaken. Why are you bringing up the traffic accident now? They stammered, clearly taken aback. Because after what you did with the credit card, it's time you stopped underestimating me, I replied, unwavering. I immediately spoke with my second son. He mentioned how your lifestyle had recently improved and also confirmed that there hadn't been any accidents. Since he lives nearby, he quickly checked and confirmed that the car was perfectly fine. It turns out the whole story was a lie. While it might be difficult to sue my own son, your wife isn't my family, so I can pursue fraud charges against her. Upon hearing this, my eldest son's wife became visibly agitated, avoiding eye contact as if she finally realized the gravity of her actions. But it was too late. What shocked me the most was that there was still no apology from either of them. They just sat there in silence, not uttering a single word of regret. I was amazed at their complete lack of common sense. Anyway, I'm demanding full repayment of the money, I continued. If that's impossible, I won't hesitate to report you to the police. I'll also make arrangements to ensure my savings aren't inherited by you and use this as an opportunity to sever ties. Wait a minute, we're family. Isn't that a bit harsh? They protested. You're adults now, so such childish excuses won't fly. I replied coldly. If I report this to the police, you'll learn about the harshness of reality. Their feeble excuses only infuriated me more. All I wanted was estrangement and repayment of the money. After making this clear, I drove them out of my house. They tried contacting me several times afterward, even coming to the house to apologize. But I was no longer willing to listen. I contacted a lawyer and began the repayment process. Eventually, my eldest son and his wife seemed to come to their senses and promised to repay the money. We're truly sorry and promise to repay the money, but it's difficult to pay $55,000 in one go. Could we perhaps arrange installment payments? There's always the option of taking out a loan, I responded sharply. If you sell the car and get rid of your expensive branded items, you can quickly raise the money. Don't make me angrier. Of course, I had no intention of accepting installment payments, and how they borrowed money was none of my concern. They repeatedly requested installment plans through the lawyer, but I refused. Reluctantly, my son and his wife took out personal loans and for the remaining amount, resorted to loan sharks. They ended up losing almost all their possessions except the car, and his wife had to start working to cover the monthly interest payments. The couple, once living lavishly, was now being tormented by the very money they had once squandered. I don't know how long this situation will last, but it's the result of their own actions. It's too late for regrets. They must live with the consequences of their choices. As for me, I'm living happily, even if alone. Life isn't just about money, it's important to live without being misled by it. Are you playing on your computer in your room again? You really have an easy life, my mother-in-law, Kathy, commented with a disapproving tone. No, that's not true. I'm working from home. I'm not just playing around, I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, but I've seen you playing games on your computer screen before. Don't lie to me, I won't be fooled. Kathy absolutely refuses to accept that I work from home. To her, work means leaving the house and going to a physical office, and she's unwilling to reconsider this outdated notion. One day, she announced, Meg is coming back. I plan to let her stay here, so could you give up your room to her and leave? What? I was stunned. Does she realize Ken and I are the ones paying the $5,000 rent for this house? If I leave, that means... But before I could finish, I saw the cold determination in her eyes. Despite the absurdity of it, Kathy's efforts to push me out continued relentlessly. I decided it was time to go, just as she wanted. The very next day, the movie company she had called arrived. Which belongings should I move? One of the workers asked. All of mine, I replied calmly, watching as Kathy's face paled with every box they carried out. "What are you doing?" she finally demanded, her voice tinged with panic. "Just taking all my belongings," I said, my tone even. As my things were loaded into the truck one after another, Kathy's expression turned increasingly blue. "My name is Jane, a 34-year-old remote worker. My husband Ken, and I got married 2 years ago. At the time, I was working in an office where Ken was also a colleague. The company was small but had a warm, welcoming atmosphere. We often went out for drinks with our coworkers, and through our shared love of reading, Ken and I grew closer. After 3 years of dating, we got married. It was a beautiful workplace romance that blossomed into a life together. Our colleagues celebrated our marriage with great joy. Shortly after our wedding, I decided to pursue my long-held dream of working from home and left my office job. My juniors were teary-eyed as they wished me well. "We'll miss you, senior. Please come visit us," they said, sending me off with bouquets and warm hugs. It was a wonderful company, and I hoped Ken would continue to thrive there. Since childhood, I've loved reading, which naturally led to a passion for writing novels. In my spare time, I would write and enter contests. One day, one of my works caught the attention of a publishing house that had previously shown interest in me. That was the moment my dream became a reality. I became a professional novelist. I quit my job just as we got married and made my debut in the literary world. Initially, Ken and I lived in a small apartment, where our life together was simple but filled with happiness. He was incredibly supportive, giving me the time I needed to write and even helping with household chores, especially when deadlines loomed. We truly supported each other. However, our peaceful life took a sudden turn when we received news that my father-in-law, Ben, had fallen ill. We rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Lying quietly in the hospital bed was Ben, who had already passed away. "Dad, Dad," Ken cried, but there was no response. No matter how much we called, Dad wouldn't wake up. Kathy held his cold hand, weeping. "Dad." His passing left a profound impact on all of us, especially Kathy, who clung tightly to him, her sobs echoing through the room. I hadn't known Ben well, but seeing their grief, I couldn't help but cry with them. Little did I know then just how much his death would change our lives moving forward. As a novelist, my career was thriving. I had a book published and a series was starting in a magazine. My work was progressing smoothly, and my income was steadily increasing. Ken was my biggest supporter. "Jane, you're amazing," he would say, beaming with pride. "Quitting your job to focus on your writing was the right decision. I'll support you all the way. Keep it up." His encouragement was my greatest strength. 2 years had passed since Ben's death. Kathy, who had been deeply depressed initially, was gradually regaining her spirits and managing to live on her own. Meg had gotten married and moved to a place a bit far from her childhood home, making it difficult for her to visit often. Since we lived close to Ken's family home, Kathy frequently contacted Ken, inviting us over. "Are you well? I bought some delicious sashimi today. Let's eat together," she would say. Or, "I accidentally bought 2 packs of eggs. Could you come over and take one?" Ken believed she must be lonely living alone, so we tried to visit as often as possible. Remembering the grief-stricken look on Kathy's face when Ben passed away, I wanted to comfort her, so I would often interrupt my work to accompany Ken. Seeing her face light up when we arrived made us both feel relieved. However, the frequency of Kathy's calls began to increase, and it started to affect my work deadlines. Around this time, Ken suggested, "Jane's work is being impacted, and I'm getting tired too. How about we move in with my mother?" The idea took me by surprise. Living together, I remembered stories from friends who had lived with their mothers-in-law and felt a wave of anxiety. "Can I manage it with your mother?" Ken reassured me. "It'll be fine, Jane. We'll set up a dedicated workroom for you so you can work without interruptions. We'll also ensure our bedroom and personal spaces are private. Plus, if something happens to Mom, we can respond quickly, and we won't have to go out as much." Gradually, I warmed to the idea. I was concerned about Kathy, and the constant calls were disrupting my work schedule. Living together would be more convenient for us, and it would keep Kathy from feeling lonely. However, there was a practical concern. Our house was a bit small. Isn't it going to be difficult for 3 people to live in that house? I wondered aloud. I asked, "Is that true?" Ken nodded. "Yes, and I've been thinking about finding a slightly larger place for us." He showed me pamphlets of different properties. You've already found one? I asked, surprised. Yeah, I've been considering it for a while. I think this apartment would be comfortable since it has many rooms, Ken replied. The apartment he had in mind was spacious, with plenty of layout options, but the rent was on the higher side. Still, given my current income, it wasn't unreasonable. I agreed with his proposal, saying, "That sounds good." Ken smiled warmly and said, "Thank you." He immediately contacted his mother, Kathy, who readily agreed to the plan. Kathy sold her house, and we all moved into the new apartment together. Looking back, I wish I had taken more time to understand Kathy before deciding to live together. I never imagined that this casual agreement would lead to deep regret later. At first, Kathy loved the new apartment. It had enough rooms, a spacious kitchen, and even a sauna in the bathroom. The rent was high at $5,000, but the place was comfortable and met all our needs. The newly built apartment had that pleasant new house smell, and both the interior and exterior were spotless. Seeing Kathy so delighted, almost childlike in her happiness, made me think that maybe living together was the right choice. Initially, everything went smoothly, and we lived together harmoniously. I had explained my work-from-home situation properly, and Kathy even helped with the household chores. Ken found it more convenient to commute since our new apartment was closer to the station, and he spent the extra time he gained with us. However, after a while, I noticed a change in Kathy's attitude. "Jane, what are you doing in your room all day? If you're just playing, can't you do something more productive?" she asked one day. "No, Kathy, as I mentioned before, I'm working," I replied. "I know you say it's work, but you're always engrossed in games, right?" she insisted. "No, that's not it," I tried to explain, but it seemed Kathy had misunderstood. She had once seen a game screen on my computer during a visit to my room and assumed I was pretending to work while playing. In reality, I was writing novels and also doing video editing work. The editing involved streams of a specific game, and Kathy had walked in while I was working on that. Actually, in addition to writing novels, I also do video editing as a side job, I explained. "Video editing? What's that? I don't quite understand, but it's still a game, right?" Kathy responded, her tone skeptical. "No, it's not," I tried to clarify. But Kathy shook her head, refusing to listen. "I won't be fooled anymore. I was helping with household chores because you said it was work, but I'm not doing it anymore. You should handle all the housework. Working from home sounds suspicious. Work should be done outside." "Kathy, it's possible to work without leaving the house nowadays," I tried to reason with her. "Don't try to deceive me," she snapped. I was surprised and confused by Kathy's sudden change in attitude. After that, her harsh treatment toward me intensified day by day. "Don't you notice there's trash on the hallway floor? Can you clean it?" she demanded. "You hadn't started preparing dinner yet? I'm hungry. I want sweet and sour pork tonight, Jane. Please make it." Kathy stopped helping with household chores altogether, leaving everything to me. I had to interrupt my work daily to take care of the household tasks. When it was just the two of us, I could manage cooking in between work, but after Kathy moved in, it became increasingly difficult. As a result, I had to do video editing late into the night. As Kathy's harsh behavior escalated, I brought it up with Ken. However, he didn't take me seriously. "Mom bullying you? Impossible. She would never do that." Ken dismissed my concerns. "It's true," I insisted. "Recently, she's left all the household chores to me, so I can't focus on my work." "You're overthinking it, Jane. Mom is getting older and tires easily. Maybe that's why it feels like she's bullying you. Aren't you tired from your computer work?" Ken replied, completely siding with Kathy. "Don't you believe me?" I asked, disappointed. Ken's lack of understanding left me feeling isolated. After that, Kathy's treatment only got worse. Recently, she even started pressuring me about grandchildren, asking, "When will you have a child? When can I see my grandchild?" Kathy demanded. When I calmly explained that it was something for Ken and me to decide as a couple, she shot back, "Are you infertile? I'll introduce you to a doctor," and started dialing the hospital. I quickly took the phone from her. "I don't think we're infertile," I said firmly. "Please give us a little more time." "Time? I don't have much time left. I want to see my grandchild. What's the point of having a daughter-in-law who can't bear children?" Her sharp words cut through me, and the stress only intensified. "I'm sorry, but I have a work deadline approaching," I said, trying to escape to my room. "Off to play on the computer again? How lazy, while your husband works so hard, Kathy sneered. She completely refused to understand that I was working from home. Her belief that work must be done outside the house was deeply ingrained, and she seemed unwilling to change her mindset. As if that wasn't enough, she continued, Meg is coming back soon. She plans to live here, so please give your room to her. What? Why? I asked, bewildered. Meg is pregnant and wants to come back home for childbirth. Unlike you, she's a proper daughter-in-law fulfilling her role by getting pregnant. So, I want her to use your room, Kathy declared. I was utterly shocked by this sudden proposal. But before I could respond, Kathy added even more harshly, so I want you to leave this house. Understand that properly. Why should I have to leave this house? Why am I being told such a thing? This is my home too, I protested, trying to make sense of the situation. Kathy laughed scornfully. You say it's your home, but you're just a parasite who doesn't do any proper work. In fact, you're just in the way. If you want to play on your computer, you can go somewhere else. There's an internet cafe near the station. Unable to bear Kathy's relentless pressure, I finally said, okay, I'll leave, and decided to move out as she requested. Kathy's triumphant smile only deepened as I immediately went back to my room and began packing. I could hear her humming happily as I did so. That night, I decided to consult with Ken one more time. I wanted to gauge his reaction, but Ken never seemed to understand my feelings. My mother couldn't have said such a thing. It's just another one of your delusions, Jane. Stop making Mom suffer. Me? Making your mother suffer? Isn't it the other way around? I retorted, but he wasn't listening. If Maggie's coming back home for childbirth, why don't you go back to your parents' home for a while? It would be easier for her, and it's just for a short time, he suggested. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wanted me to leave too. That was the breaking point. I felt my love for Ken start to fade, and I began to prepare for the move with new resolve. Kathy, clearly pleased that I was leaving, quickly arranged for a moving company. The next day, the movers arrived, arranged by Kathy herself. Which belongings should we move? They asked. Before Kathy could speak, I quickly responded, all of my belongings, please. All of them? What do you mean by all? The movers asked, confused. Everything, I replied calmly. All the furniture and appliances in this house. Kathy's face flushed with shock. Wait, what? What are you saying? I continued to ignore her. Would you like to move these items to your new home, or should we buy them from you? The mover asked. Please purchase them, I said without hesitation. Kathy, now in a panic, grabbed my arm and shook me hard. What are you saying? Answer me. I knew the moving company Kathy hired also dealt with purchasing goods, which is why I had decided to sell everything. The movers began carrying out the furniture and appliances one by one. Kathy watched in disbelief as her belongings were taken away, but I remained calm. Wait, what are you doing? She demanded. I'm just taking all my belongings, I replied, unbothered by her distress. This is unbelievable. We have no place to live. Kathy cried out. That's not my concern. I purchased these items for this house, I stated firmly. Lies. You're lying again, she spat back. If you think it's a lie, ask your son to confirm, I suggested coolly. Desperate, Kathy called Ken, who was at work. Hey, is it true that Jane bought all the furniture and appliances in this house? Kathy asked Ken frantically over the phone. Yeah, Mom, that's right. Is there a problem? I'm in a meeting right now, Ken replied, sounding impatient before hanging up. I handed Kathy a piece of paper. I'll leave this for you, I said. She looked down at it and saw that it was a divorce petition already signed by me. What is this? I've decided to get a divorce, I stated calmly. I'm leaving this house. Divorce? Why? I never said you had to leave, Kathy exclaimed, clearly taken aback. After being bullied by you and told to leave for your daughter's childbirth, do you think I have any reason to stay? Your son is a mama's boy who only listens to you and never tries to understand me. You said a daughter-in-law without grandchildren is useless. My role as your daughter-in-law ends here. Please give this divorce petition to your son. Kathy was initially stunned, but quickly retorted, maybe that's for the best. Now my daughter can stay here comfortably, and I won't have to deal with your seclusion anymore. I can use this big kitchen all by myself. How thankful I am. I responded coolly, well, whether your son can afford the rent for this house is another matter. She looked confused. What do you mean? The rent for this house is $5,000 a month, I informed her. Her complexion changed. $5,000? Yes, I confirmed. I have been paying it with the earnings from my novels. Novels? Kathy was clearly shaken. Here's the translation of your text, I continued, handing her a paper. Of course, Ken's salary alone could never cover a $5,000 monthly rent. You've always criticized me for just playing on the computer, but in reality, I've been working hard. I write novels, have published books, and even made it onto the bestseller list in newspapers. But I guess you wouldn't understand, since you think of me as a recluse. Kathy was at a loss for words. And about those games you mentioned, I have a talent in that field too. My editing work has increased, and so has my income. I've been paying for all the living expenses and miscellaneous costs of this house. The arrogant attitude Kathy had just moments ago completely vanished. Jane, wait a minute. I was wrong. I had no idea about any of this. Please don't leave. Without you, we can't live, she said, clinging to my feet. What is this all about? I muttered. It seems to me that you only need me to pay the rent. Kathy's eyes widened in surprise. No, it's not like that, she frantically denied. I said it wrong. You are needed by our family, by my son, so please don't think about divorce. Stay here, I'm begging you. But I calmly replied, it's too late, Kathy. I've already found a new place to live. I plan to spend my time there freely, writing my novels, I quietly told Kathy. She was trembling as she dialed her son. He's in a meeting, she shouted in frustration, but she persisted. Jane says she's leaving the house. She wants a divorce. What should we do? What about the rent? Once again, her only concern was the rent. She handed me the phone, and Ken's desperate voice came through. Jane, what's happening? Why a divorce? You never listened to me, I replied calmly. You even told me to leave, just following your mother's orders. That was just temporary, he insisted. I didn't mean forever. I've tried to talk to you many times about the way your mother treated me, but you always took her side. I can't stay here any longer. The movers are already here. I'm leaving. So enjoy living with your family starting tomorrow, and do your best to pay the rent. I hung up the phone. Everything is done. What's next? The movers asked, the room now completely empty. Yes, we're ready to leave, I said, picking up my bag and turning towards Kathy. I appreciate everything, Kathy. Take care. With that, I left the house with the movers. When Ken returned from work, he found the house empty, no furniture, no appliances, and Kathy sitting alone, looking lost. He too stood there, bewildered by the emptiness. Ken initially opposed the divorce, but I submitted recordings of the bullying I had endured as evidence through a lawyer and formally filed for divorce. Eventually, Ken accepted the situation, and we officially divorced. Without my income to cover the $5,000 rent, the family had no choice but to cancel the lease. By the time my sister-in-law returned, Ken, Kathy, and Meg had moved into a small rental apartment. They had to purchase new furniture and appliances, which left them with little money for rent, forcing them into an even more cramped living space. To make matters worse, it turned out that Meg hadn't returned home for childbirth, but because she had been divorced after an affair and kicked out by her husband. She might have expected to live in a luxurious apartment, but instead, she faced life in a small, cramped space, along with the added burden of alimony debt. From what I've heard, the entire family is barely making ends meet with their jobs. Meanwhile, I bought a new high-rise apartment. There, I freely write novels, work on video editing, and live comfortably without having to consider anyone else. I eat what I want, rest when I please, and enjoy my days in peace. I've even started a new series, and the joy I find in my work is unending. For now, I plan to stay away from romance and marriage, fully enjoying my single life, focus on my career.